show. It's the first Friday of the month. It's the month of July, and that means it's time for the 7th square in our 2022 Totally Tunisian calendar blanket. And this month we're going to learn the reverse stitch. Now I know the reverse stitch does fill some people with a little bit of fear, but it's essentially the exact same mechanic as the Tunisian Simple Stitch. You're just working into the back vertical bar as opposed to the front vertical bar. What do I mean? Well, normally when you work Tunisian, you're staring at the front of the fabric as you work. You want that front vertical bar. But to work the reverse stitch, you actually are working into the back vertical bar, the one that runs across the wrong side or the back of your fabric. So I find it easy to just fold it forward a little bit and look at it while I'm picking up the loops. But I'll show you what I'm talking about in the tutorial. Now this stitch might test your patience, might test your tension a little bit. So in order to make it a little easier on ourselves, we're actually going to alternate between rows of Tunisian Simple Stitch, nice and quick, and the Tunisian Reverse Stitch. I find that makes it a little easier to see what you're doing. And the end result is this very attractive horizontal rib stitch that almost looks a bit like knitting. Almost. And since this does test your tension a little bit, you might find using a larger crochet hook for the square is helpful if you have trouble kind of just keeping everything loosey-goosey. So that's totally fine for this square. And of course, I blocked mine like I'm blocking all my squares, and I will be blocking the whole project when it's done at the end too. So there we go. Let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn. We'll head on over to the craft table and we will stitch up the reverse stitch square with a little simple stitch thrown in for good measure together. Please visit our shop and purchase a pattern. It helps support our show, and we'll put a link to our shop in the description box down below. In order to do the reverse stitch square, you're going to want to use the same yarn you've been using all along. A size 4 medium weight acrylic yarn is what I'm using. You want around 90 yards for the main square color and about 10 yards for the border. You want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, an Afghan hook. I'm using a 5.5mm Afghan hook for this project, but this does tend to tighten up a little bit, so you can certainly go up a hook size if you have trouble keeping tight tension. And I like to use a regular sized 5.5mm hook to switch back to it for the border, but that's completely optional. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. As usual, I highly recommend working a little stitch sampler of the pattern before you launch into the full-size square. I've worked 6 foundation chains, and I've alternated a row of regular Tunisian Simple Stitch and a row of Tunisian Reverse Stitch. And I've done that 3 times, so 6 rows in total. You can always count your rows by looking at the chain stitch that runs up the side of your little square, and that works for something small like a sampler or large like the square. We're going to take our main square color, start with a slip knot on our Tunisian hook, and we're going to chain 38 to begin. Once you have 38 foundation chains, we're going to work a regular row of Tunisian Simple Stitch to begin. So we skip the first chain from the hook. The loop sitting on our hook already accounts for that chain, and we're going to pick up a loop in each of those remaining chains all the way across. So you insert your hook into the next chain, pick up a loop, the loop stays on your hook, and you're going to do this all the way across. You'll have 38 loops on your hook by the end of the forward pass. Once you have 38 loops on your hook, you probably have something that looks like this. You can take a moment and just unswirl it and count up your loops. Make sure you have 38 of them. And we're going to work the reverse pass now. This is just your standard reverse pass. Yarn over, pull back through the first loop on your hook. That creates the chain to run along the other side. And then it's yarn over, pull back through 2 loops, all the way back. Yarn over, pull back through 2, yarn over, pull back through 2. This is a standard reverse pass. At the end of your reverse pass, you'll be back to 1 loop left on your hook. You'll have 38 stitches all the way across, and every odd row, like the one we just did, will be the Tunisian Simple Stitch, and it will look like that. The last loop left on your hook counts as the first loop for the next row. So every row hereafter you begin work in the next stitch. So whether you're working a simple stitch or a reverse stitch, we will always be looking at the second stitch to begin the next row. All even rows for the square will be the reverse stitch, not to be confused with the reverse pass. What is the reverse stitch? Well, it's basically the Tunisian Simple Stitch, but worked into the back vertical bar from the back of the fabric. So a little bit of terminology. This is the front or the right side of your fabric, the side that is always facing you, and the back or the wrong side of the fabric is this side, the side that's always facing away. Typically, when you work a Tunisian Simple Stitch, you slip your hook underneath the next vertical bar, pick up a loop, and add it to your hook. That's a Tunisian Simple Stitch. We're going to be doing that every odd row. The reverse stitch is the reverse of the Tunisian Simple Stitch. You still want the next stitch. It helps sometimes to pull your work apart so you can see it. You'll see that it consists of a front vertical bar and the back vertical bar, which is right behind it. It looks like a sort of a loop or a horseshoe that sits over top of this stitch work in between. We want the back side. Well, I find it easy to work from the back of the fabric by actually looking at it. So the first stitch is sometimes a bit tricky. You want to keep that working yarn out of the way. You're going to identify the next stitch. This is the next stitch here. We want the back loop. So flip it over, find the back loop, slip your hook underneath it from behind. You can see that I've slipped my hook through the back vertical bar. It's sitting behind the front one. Yarn over, pick up a loop, and now you can sort of see that back vertical bar is pulled out a little bit. Let's do the next one. Next one's easy because now your yarn's in a better spot. So flip it forward. You can see all of the little stitches all the way across. They look like little sets of 2 loops. Find the first one of the set of 2 and just slip your hook underneath it. This is going to take a little getting used to, of course. There we go. Slip the hook under. Pick up a loop, and if you pull your work apart, you can see that I've grabbed the back vertical bar of the next stitch. Here's the next stitch. I don't want the front vertical bar, I want the back vertical bar. So I flip it over, find the next stitch, grab that piece of it, yarn over, pick up a loop. And if I pull it apart, I kind of look underneath, I can see that I've pulled up a loop in that back vertical bar. Here's the next stitch. You can see there's the front, there's the back vertical bar just behind it. I want to flip my work forward so I can see what I'm doing, slip my hook underneath that next stitch, pick up a loop in it, and that's what you're going to do all the way across. So you pull it apart, find the next stitch, keep your thumb on it if it helps, move it forward, and then you grab that stitch. So that's the loop that sits behind it on the back. And as you're doing that, it's going to be pushing pieces of that stitch forward. So it almost looks like a row of purl stitch from knitting. If you get lost, just stop, find the next vertical bar, and you don't want the front one, you want the back one. So you just flip it forward a little bit, slip your hook underneath it. You can see that it's not the front one, I got the back one, and pick up a loop. So this is going to take a little getting used to. The reverse stitch feels funny. It requires you to sort of manhandle your yarn a little bit, but a few rows in it becomes easier because you've got more of the fabric to kind of hold on to and grab. You might find it helpful to work against a surface rather than just sort of holding it in midair like me. Maybe work against your lap. There's the next stitch. I don't want the front bar, I want the back bar. So I just pitch it forward, slip my hook underneath that back bar, yarn over, pick up a stitch. So the even rows will probably be a little slow going once you get used to it. You're still going to want to have 38 loops on your hook all the way across. Using a slightly larger hook is possibly more beneficial for this stitch because this might make you want to tighten up a little bit. Just take your time, pick up a loop in each of the back loops, back vertical bars. So we're looking for the back vertical bar on the wrong side or the back side of your fabric. So just grab each one, work each one at a time, pausing every so often to make sure everything looks nice and even out the front. And you can just do that all the way across, and I'll hook up with you on the other side. Once you've picked up a loop in each back vertical bar, so the back vertical bar of each stitch all the way across, you're going to see that the ridge of crochet has sort of been pushed forward. When you get to the last stitch, so there's the last vertical bar, the last stitch, we're going to use the whole thing. So we're going to just slip our hook from the front of our work through both loops at the edge and pick up a loop. And that's just going to continue a nice little sort of chain stitch up the side. That'll match this side over here, and it'll help keep the square from rolling. So we're starting and ending with a Tunisian simple stitch, and on the even rows, everything in between will be a reverse stitch. Now, unlike the reverse stitch, the reverse pass, which is just a common traditional reverse pass, it's the same as all the other ones. There's nothing new to think about here, so this will go a little quicker. You just yarn over, pull back through the first loop, yarn over, pull back through 2. Yarn over, pull back through 2, all the way across. So this is your standard reverse pass, nothing new here. The reverse stitch magic is done on the forward pass, so it's basically just where you're picking up the loop, which is in the back vertical bar, or the vertical bar on the wrong side of your fabric. So once you've got all those loops, just do a standard reverse pass, and we'll take a look at what we've got. At the end of the reverse pass, you'll have 38 stitches. It'll look like a row of Tunisian Simple Stitch. You've got your nice, obvious vertical bars all sitting up there, but you know you've done a row of reverse because everything beneath it sits pushed forward. You know you've done 2 rows by counting up the chain stitch that runs up the side of your square. So that's row 1, row 2. We're going to begin row 3. All the odd rows are a row of Tunisian Simple Stitch. That first loop already is at work for that first vertical bar. The simple stitch is just picking up a loop in each of those nice, obvious vertical bars all the way across. Pick up a loop for each vertical bar. This is the Tunisian Simple Stitch again on the odd row. At the end of the row, in order to keep pace with the row before, there's our last stitch. I can pick up the last vertical bar or use both loops. I'm going to do that just so I keep reminding myself to do the same thing at the end of the row for each row. That's 38 loops on your hook, and it's just the standard reverse pass all the way back. Yarn over, pull back through the first loop only, yarn over, pull back through 2, all the way back. We're back to 1 loop on our hook, and it looks like we've got 2 rows of Tunisian Simple Stitch. You can see the front vertical bar of row 2. That was actually a row of Tunisian reverse stitch, but of course it pushes the crochet just below it forward, and then leaves that nice vertical bar that we just worked into to create a row of Tunisian Simple Stitch. So you can tell whenever your work looks like this, there's a ridge and then 2 straight bars after you finish. You know the next thing you do has to be a row of reverse stitch. Alternatively, just count your rows, 1, 2, 3. You've completed 3 rows, that means you're on to row 4. That's an even row, which means we're back to the reverse stitch. So that first stitch is by default a simple stitch. We want to begin in the next vertical bar, but because we're working the reverse stitch, we're looking at the back now. So that first stitch can be a little tricky. You might want to pull your work apart, grab that stitch, push yourself forward so you know where you want to grab that next bar. I find I get that one out of the way and the next ones are pretty easy. So there's the next stitch. I look for the next vertical bar, pick up a loop, and once you get comfortable with it, you can actually just work from behind all the way across. So as you kind of you can maybe pull your work apart and see the individual stitches. There's the bump at the bottom, there's the 2 little loops at the top. You might want to sort of hold it flat in front of you. If you're unsure, flip it forward, find that next bar. So I know that that's my next stitch and that's my next loop, that first loop of the little 2. Don't worry about pulling your work apart if you have to sort of just tug on it gently. If you're not sure where you are, it's not going to harm your work. You can always flip it forward. There's my next stitch. Slip your hook under it, pick up a loop. And if you want to keep working across the back, there's the next stitch, slip my hook under it, pick up a loop. There's my next stitch, slip my hook under it, pick up a loop. And that way I'll get all 38 picked up all the way across. If I have to stop and pause, there's my next stitch. Just take your time. The reverse stitch does take a little bit of time and energy, but look how cool that looks. And no burrito. When you get across to the last vertical bar, the last stitch in the row, grab the whole end of it and pull up a loop, and that'll just make it reflect the first stitch of the row. And you'll see that doing the reverse or picking up a loop in the back vertical bar pushes all of that bit of the stitch sort of forward. And until you get used to what you're looking for, I recommend counting your loops at the end of every forward pass, just to make sure you've got 38 before you start your reverse pass. Remember, it's the same for every row. Yarn over, pull back through the first loop only. Yarn over, pull back through 2. At the end of the reverse pass, you'll be back to 1 loop on your hook. You should have 38 stitches all the way across. And the reverse stitch has pushed that part of the stitch forward, so now you've got another little row of ridge there. But you can clearly see the vertical bars created by the reverse pass. Nice and easy, and of course you know you've done 1, 2, 3, 4 rows in total, which means you're on to row 5, or an odd row, which means you're back to a row of the simple stitch. So this is the breathe a sigh of relief row before you do another row of reverse. So all even rows are the reverse stitch, all odd rows are the simple stitch. You want 32 rows in total, so you'll have 16 rows of each, 16 rows of single, or I should say of simple, and 16 rows of reverse. The reverse pass is always the same, and every other row you're going to get this lovely little ridge happening all the way across. So go ahead, take your time, be patient with yourself. I feel like that's the only really difficult part about learning the reverse stitch, is being patient, figuring out what's comfortable, how to hold your hook in your work, and just work your way across to 32 rows. I'll see you in a little while. Row 32 is a reverse stitch row. So it's an even row, we know it's a reverse stitch, and by this point you should have something that looks like this. A little bit of rolling, but not too much. Every other row you see that lovely ridge effect, and then the rows in between is just that regular Tunisian simple stitch. Once you've got 32 rows, you can snip your yarn if you're changing colors for the border and fasten off. Take a moment to weave in your tails, or you can work over top of them. I'm going to switch now back to my original or my regular crochet hook. We're going to do that single crochet border, and I'm going to grab my green yarn to start the border. I'm going to make a slip knot with my border color. If you are not changing colors, you're just going to chain 1. For the rest of us, we are going to join our yarn with a single crochet around that first vertical bar. So join with a single crochet, and like all the other squares in this series, we are going to single crochet around the vertical bars. So there's number 2, don't want to miss any, all the way across the top. So you'll have 38 stitches all the way across the top 1 single crochet for each of those Tunisian reverse stitches you made in the last row. I've got 37 single crochet across the top. Number 38 goes in the front vertical bar. So we've got that nice little running chain that goes up the edge. Don't confuse this little top bit here. That's sort of the bit of the stitch that sits in between the vertical bars. This is the front vertical bar of stitch number 38. So I'm going to single crochet in there. That makes stitch number 38 for my border. Chain 1, that turns our corner. We'll work the first stitch of the side part of the border into the same place. So single crochet, chain 1, single crochet in that last vertical bar. And the vertical bars, or the front loop of the running stitch that runs all the way down the side of your square, is where you're going to work your single crochets. So a single crochet into the front loop, or the front vertical bar of each of those stitches running down the side edge. You'll have 1 for each row, so 32, and then we're going to get to the foundation chain row. That will be stitch number 33. That's a single crochet for each row edge all the way down the first side. That's 32. That brings me up to the first foundation chain. I still have my little tail hanging out there. I'm going to work stitch number 33 into that first chain. Chain 1 to turn the corner, and single crochet in the same place. That sets me up for the first stitch. Along the bottom, you're going to single crochet in each foundation chain all the way across. I'm working over top of my short tails. You'll have 38 stitches all the way across the bottom. I've got 38 single crochet across the bottom. Chain 1 to turn the corner, work a single crochet into the same last foundation chain. That becomes the first stitch up the second side. You want 1 single crochet for each row edge, plus this one down here at the bottom, and we're going to work our single crochets into the front vertical bar of each stitch. So not the whole thing, just the front vertical bar, and that will mirror the opposite side. So 33 single crochet in total up the second side. The last stitch up the second side is worked into the same front vertical bar as the first stitch of the border. That's the stitch we joined our yarn in. Chain 1 to turn the corner, and we're going to slip stitch to join to the top of the first single crochet. That is the single crochet that we joined the yarn with, or if you didn't change color, it's just the first single crochet of the border. Fasten off, weave in that tail, and this square does require a little bit of blocking. Of course, it will depend on your own personal tension, but you can see that mine is almost square, and with a bit of steam blocking, that will square up very nicely. And I'm going to go do that now. I have now blocked my square. It lies nice and flat. It's roughly 12 by 12. I do use my other squares as a size guide when blocking, just to make sure they're all roughly the same size. Exact size doesn't matter though. You want to make sure you have the right stitch count so they all stitch together neatly in the end. And once the whole blanket is done at the end, we can give it another blocking just to get the right finalized shape. That is the right side, or the front of the square, and this is the wrong side, or the back of the square. Also has a very nice little pretty bumpy effect. But you can really see that reverse stitch row that pushes that line of crochet to the front. Really nice ribbed effect. This is such a pleasing little ribbed stitch. I love the flatness of the simple stitch highlighted by the rib of that reverse stitch. It is so cool. I know you're going to find this a fun stitch to use in Tunisian projects down the road. And even though some of these stitches can be a little bit trying or cumbersome or even challenging, knowing more, having more of these Tunisian stitches in your repertoire is only going to improve your crochet terminology down the road. We hope you enjoyed stitching up square number 7 along with us this month, And we will see you soon here on the Jayda and Stitches Show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a great week. Bye, everyone!
Hi, everybody. Mr. and Stitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.